Hello, Substackers. Welcome back. I'm really honored today to have a very special guest, Jordan Bighorn from Winnipeg, Manitoba in Canada. And first of all, welcome to the Substack channel, Jordan.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
You're very welcome to be here, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better and being enlightened by some of your the principles and service activities that you're involved with. So I'm just going to read a little bit about you, if you don't mind. So it sort of sums up some of your activities of your young life. Jordan Bighorn is of Lakota heritage, hailing from Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Standing Rock Sioux communities out west. He currently is co-director of CEDA, the Community Education Development Association out of Winnipeg. He's the co-producer of the short film The Path Home, a short film commissioned by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Canada on the completion of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Most recently screened at an international conference on peace hosted by the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And I believe you're one of the 9 members of the Baha'i National Spiritual Assembly. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm currently serving this year.
Okay, yeah, which is like the supreme institution for Canada of the Baha'is, and it's elected once a year in a beautiful, clean system, electoral process, which is includes no campaigning, no politics. It's really beautiful. So, uh, first of all, I know that I heard a bit of buzz about a talk that you gave not that long ago in the summer in Calgary, I believe, at the 49th or 47th conference of the Association for Baha'i Studies. And perhaps you could share a couple of points from that. And also, I have a question that you might be kind enough to answer.
Sure.
For First Nations people in Canada or anywhere around the world, what does the Baha'i world community offer? And
Hmm.
vice versa, what do the First Nations people have to offer the Baha'i community? Sort of like both ways. How might
Hmm.
it be mutually beneficial, if it is?
Hmm.
So the mic is in your hands, so go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Hugh, and for this opportunity to reflect. I kind of did my own little Googling and clicking around and saw some of the work that you've been involved with. Really a world citizen and traveling around and picking up various means at which, humanity over the time that it's been on this planet has figured out ways just to ultimately find alignment and connection with the environment, the land around it, and then finally, as we started to really interact among tribes and nations, and we had to figure out how we would do that as well. And unfortunately, on the one hand, for a lot of the history books that show the violence and yeah, I guess the violence of how that has played out. We know that we also wouldn't be here at all if we didn't have other avenues of keeping people together and finding different points of unity and society building, etc. So I think with that kind of backdrop, I would just yeah, just offer a few thoughts. To your questions. And then, yes, there was this talk that really the Association for Baha'i Studies annual gathering has really been a core part of my life as a touch point of experiences that have shaped certain parts of my life at its core. And each time there's an opportunity to come and contribute or to participate, I really look forward to that as well. It's especially at any point where you can gather with so many loved ones and friends, and over the years, as time passes, it also becomes kind of a family reunion of sorts. Um,
Sure.
so maybe where I would start, and because it'll tie into what I was trying to explore in this talk, um, And in kind of the context of Treaty One territory here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, as a, I guess, colonially dual citizen, born in Seattle, and so yes, we were raised in the borders of the United States, and then we moved to Canada in the early 90s. My parents were hired at the time of Maxwell International Baha'i School on Vancouver Island. And so we picked up and moved there over the space of a summer, and that really has since been home base. And so my mom and my sister and brother still live over in British Columbia. My dad passed in 2008.
Mhm.
And I found myself after high school moving back into the States and going to undergraduate and work, and then finding a calling to really spend time and go live with my dad's side of the family, which were all from Fort Peck, Oglala as well, bit of Standing Rock relatives in Northern Cheyenne. So really around the plains. And indeed, my mom and her paternal side of the family also was really based in Wakpala, Yankton territory. And my
Mhm.
grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she was actually from southern eastern U.S., the Chickasaw people
Mhm.
around Oklahoma. So,
So
but
you're really a world citizen yourself in that sense
yeah,
of different tribes and peoples coming together and living in different parts of the continent, Turtle Island.
that's right. Yeah, more of a Turtle Island citizen, I suppose.
Yeah.
But since then, I'll jump right ahead to our current family. My wife is as heritage from the kind of a Thracian, Byzantine, Greek, Bulgarian background. So yeah, so that's where some of the more of the world comes into our family. But
Yeah.
yeah, I having been raised in such a way in a relationship with my maternal grandfather, Phil Lane Sr. Matrogi, Brown Bear was his name that was passed to him, and he really instituted a relationship with me called Techi Hokshila, which is really, kind of this universal recognition of a relationship between the elders, the grandparents, the senior members of a community, and then its youngest. So in this context, it's the eldest grandchild and eldest grandson, rather, really. And so the grandfather would see that relationship as a real means to pass down certain things.
Right. So
And
it's sort of like a lineage based on uh, familial relationship,
yeah,
a mentorship, you might say, that's passed down from generation to generation.
correct, correct. And I think in what I've come away with, and making my way to your questions, is my family in particular, of course, we could have a whole series of conversations that on the colonial impact for Native peoples on
Sure.
this continent,
Yeah.
how the U.S. and Canada has diverged in a bit of how they've developed and what happened and currently still happens with Native community. But in my context, it is that kind of duality of my grandparents on my maternal side being taken to Haskell Indian School, and so that's where they met. And in large part, they never went home after that for the rest of their lives, ultimately settling in Walla Walla, Washington, far away from their homelands. And even in their old age, I don't know that they ever went back
Mm.
for any period of time, as much as I knew there was a longing as well to do that. My dad's side, though, still a lot of the family still remains in eastern Montana and South Dakota today,
Mhm.
um, and found themselves really embedded in the Dakota Presbyterian Church, and so that's what kind of I think really held the family there together. But having been raised really under the tutelage and the kind of environment that my maternal grandparents provided, this passing down, Hugh, of culture and knowledge and tradition to me was more of a distillation process, an essence of the culture. Yes, I could see an observation with parts of the language, cultural artifacts. They were farmers and horse people. So there was an element of how to really work with the land and have relationship with the land, from
Hmm.
field to the creek to the barn to the sprinkler pipes. All these things had different reflection of how they were relatives. They weren't just a commodity.
Yes.
And so those were all kind of infused in our, annual summer visits and other visits, etc. But really, all as I think back to all the stories and the teachings and the relationship and how he carried those memories of where he came from to what he had built with my grandmother since, that was far more of an impression to me of what values, what understandings, and what core gravity of how you would create family and community from a cultural lens played out right in front of me from a standpoint of health, prosperity, still perceiving an absolute direct line to ancestral lands, but yet this little oasis in the southeastern corner of Washington State was also existed, that could happen too. The other part, quite frankly, was education. My grandfather, through his kind of boxing prowess, was able to immediately access higher education, and so Oregon State University. And so that also, I think, was that avenue of continual improvement and growth and refinement. That quote from the Baha'i writings about consider man to be a mine rich in gems of an inestimable value, and education alone can cause it to reveal its treasures. So, despite all of what he carried traditionally, and he was raised really from his grandfather as well, who really had some significance, and the family line actually had some significance over the years, back in
Hmm.
the 1800s. But without an avenue of learning, could very well have just stayed at a certain point, right, of health and growth. And so my
Yes.
parents, and the same on my dad's side as well, there was a real, and in that country at Fort Peck, as you mentioned, the Bighorns there are known for basketball and school. So these
Is
two kind
that
of, yeah, tribal college development there, and education
yeah.
and basketball are two main things. So they're really
Where
kind
does
of,
the sorry, where does the name Bighorn come from? Do you know the origin?
well, yeah, I mean it is tied in as the impacts and results from that battle
Ah,
in 1876, I
right,
believe,
right.
in June. Well, history knows it as the Battle of Little Bighorn.
That's right.
That, that
Of course, yes.
yeah,
I never even thought of that. So I didn't associate the two, but it makes sense.
yeah, that's kind of that territory. There's a Bighorn Mountain Range there
Yeah.
and different things, and so it kind of emerges a little bit tied into that. We have relatives actually that are in. You were mentioning. I forget his first name now, but one of the Tacans.
Tony Takan, yeah.
Yeah, so like Birdtail Sioux and so on in the eastern part of Manitoba, where again Sitting Bull's
That's
community
right.
would have come
Yes.
north, and so there are times where I think we have some distant relation to Chief Gall, who was one of the main war chiefs at the time. And when I went to visit one of those communities, I think it was Dakota Teepee, one of their centers, they had a picture of Chief Gall there, and so yeah, there's those relations there.
I had a very powerful dream a few years ago. I was one of those waking dreams, and the two words white and bull came into my screen in my mind, and I started to say the words while I was still sleeping. White bull, white bull. And I
Hmm.
was so interested because it was very impactful. So I thought while I was still dreaming, I must, when I wake up, find out. I must go to the computer to Google and find out what these words mean. And I clicked it in, and what came up was White Bull, the brother of Sitting Bull, who was a
Hmm.
chief. And when there was tremendous persecution by the federal government and so on of the people out there after the battle, White Bull took some of his people up to Saskatchewan for several years to survive, basically for protection, and then later went back down to the Dakotas, I guess. but he
Right.
was an amazing chief, and he died 1 month before I was born. Interesting
Wow.
enough, he lived to
Very
be 98 years old. Yeah.
interesting.
So it's a fascinating story of the Dakota people and the spiritual teachings as well as the history. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're part of that legacy.
Yeah, and you may of course be familiar with Black Elk
Right.
and the seminal book Black Elk Speaks, and there are different when I went and stayed with my dad's side of the family there, which now in fact is called Black Elk Peak, because it was
Mhm.
Harney Peak at one point, kind of the highest elevation point in the state, just outside Rapid City and in the Black Hills. And yeah, I've always felt such an affinity to that recounting his great vision. And there's a lot of, I think, symbolism. And as you say, like there's the energies in the world at that time that if you just kind of tuned yourself a little bit, you would be picking up things.
Yes. Yeah.
So
White buffalo woman. Well, he was, I suppose, a seer or a prophet of sorts, and was able
yeah,
to probably very sensitive and pure-hearted, and was able to go into a different plane of perception
yeah,
and to understand some of the principles that were working out with his people, but also the
yeah,
future as well. So
yeah.
fascinating.
So maybe I'll jump very quickly into again some of your question because
Very
I
good.
feel as though there's kind of two themes that I'm still very, interested in working out or exploring. And at the core is one question of like why. So, why, did our history play out in the particular way that it did? At large, again, my ABS talk was looking at this notion of migration and ultimately an east to west migration. I mean, why? Just in general, a thought piece of why did the whole world come this way and we didn't go that way? And there's various kind of initial response for sure that the much time we didn't develop certain technology, blah blah blah. But
This
I
by east to west, you mean the coming of the colonial powers from Europe to the Western Hemisphere?
more or less, like nobody came really, people didn't come from the Pacific, from like China
Oh,
didn't sail this way
oh,
and kind of
right.
settle
Okay.
and call it, right? So I
Yes.
guess yeah, just more of that notion of yes, it
Right.
was driven as much by colonial interest and
Exactly.
expansion and the new
Right.
world and so on, but even so, until things did start coming across the Pacific, it was, even to this day migration and asylum and refugee and so on. And then in due time, as we know, America itself, really during its heyday, if you will, is this beacon of freedom and a place to go. Even this specter of just what is America, the American dream that really I think we still hear it today as folks come like this ethos in their mind of what it was supposed to be.
Yes.
And so it would have risen up and created an identity in the world and drawn the world to itself. And it wasn't like any where else was that in kind of the world that drew, people to it in that way. So that's kind of the context I feel is like, again, why here in particular and what environment did it provide? And I feel as though, to your point earlier about that kind of, at least Black Elks and many others, receptivity is in that talk. I really, and again, I was that clip of Ernest Tutusis. He makes this very short comment, and I don't know how it was in university at the University of Winnipeg, and I don't know how I found this clip, and just so happened to be this clip of this old CBC show. And there he is, and he just makes this profound statement of this is land where man has never disobeyed God.
Mhm.
But he qualifies that, of course, as being, but to not to live against nature, not to try to
Mhm.
conquer nature. And
It's
that,
interesting. In South America, there's the Guarani people who at one time occupied most of Brazil and
mm,
Paraguay, right up to the Caribbean. Actually, the word Caribbean comes from the Guarani language. But in
mm,
Spanish, there's a phrase referring to the Guarani people of the past, with the mythology and La Tierra sin mal, which means the land without sin or the land without evil. There
Hmm.
was a kind of a purity in the original teachings of the people, and they were very connected with both the divine and the earth. Mhm. So
Yeah.
it's that same idea of, when you first started to say that, I thought, maybe the reason, one of the factors that people came from Europe, where there were so many different nations at war for so long, different tribes and from the Russia and so on, that the native people of the Americas, even though they were treated very badly, genocided many times, but there was an openness and a receptivity, to use your word, and that usually
Mhm.
the Europeans, when they arrived, were very well treated and said, "Come on, we have lots. We want to share with you." And whereas that may not have happened um, if they had gone to other parts of the world.
Yeah, yeah. If absolutely, in a different sense of defense. I mean, it was just I was in a presentation the other day, and then there was just this quick little run through of the Roman Empire, and of course Genghis Khan, and
Oh
uh,
yeah, good old
could have,
Genghis.
yeah, yeah. So different places would have known they can defend themselves or not, and so
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there could be some practicalities in terms of of human history at large, is just to say this was the last stop. This was the last, train stop, if you will. And so it had to kind of come to a point where, yeah, where with the new world as it is, all like the mythos of it, that this is where we would find and create paradise. And, coming back to the statements of Abdu'l Baha of oftentimes that, the reflection of the light of God from the east in the West provides a different kind of illumination. So there's all these factors at play, I think, that of course we have a lot more years to go yet, but for now, in particular in Canada, the discourse and the awareness, and you can turn on every top of the hour news story. There could be a reflection of an issue specific to Indigenous peoples. That's never going to happen in the States, even probably in the state if they're maybe in Navajo country because it's such a huge
Yes.
community. But
Population,
or
right?
so, you know, so it's just nice to have that kind of constant discourse to kind of consider where things are moving. Um,
Well, the sun arises in the east and it sets in the west. So there's that kind of just in the pattern of the Earth moving around the sun, a natural gravitation westward.
right.
And after America, the North and South America, Turtle Island is the Pacific Ocean, which is a huge ocean. So once you get here to America, that's pretty much it, like you say. Otherwise, you're plopping in the middle of the sea.
That's right.
Uh,
That's right.
So even though the indigenous population is small here, although growing, it used to be about 1 or 2%. Now it's up to 3 or 4, and
Mhm.
because of a higher birth rate, generally speaking. But I've always been fascinated by what is that understanding, wisdom, knowledge, truth uh, that we find in almost every First Nations people, even though their cultures are very different, languages, history, and so on. But there's something in that culture. There's a wisdom that not only served very well for thousands and thousands of years, but is available now to Western civilization, we could call it, whether or not it's being investigated and accepted or not. I think that's growing too a little bit. But could you name what it might be that the indigenous people, First Nations, have for the larger population, which could be very even survival oriented or help to bring about the unity that is so badly needed?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I'd be happy to because it was um in this talk at ABS, and this has happened to me before with some thought that I have that really it's one thing to explore these things, let's say with yourself here, with other circles that I would be familiar with. It's another thing to maybe put them to the very people that have directly experienced these things, like our survivors of residential school.
Yeah.
knowing that, I can't speak to what they're carrying and the pain and that direct experience. But then if there is thing consideration of having meaning to add some resolution, some understanding, some connection to a higher purpose, again, that's where I'm kind of coming from. So I
Mm,
guess to that end, and to your question, I feel as though the at the end of that talk, and I was kind of rushing to it because I knew it was going to be the thing that ultimately I was trying to say was that in some regard the people have been fleeing that whatever the people did to Adam, let's go as far back as Adam, whatever people, the civilization, humanity has done to the prophet and messenger of God, as we know from killing him to exiling him to all that treatment, and they've been running from that since.
uh-huh.
And in our histories, you mentioned even white buffalo calf, in so many of our stories, particularly in North America, I'm not as familiar with South America, but North America, we would have these stories of encounters with a being. And while there might be an example like the story of White Buffalo Calf living with the two warriors and the one who approaches her with impure thoughts and he's reduced to bone, and the other one humbles himself and is able to take the announcement to the people, and she arrives with the pipe, etc. So many of our stories show that like the lower nature you mentioned, like the land without sin, the lower nature was overcome and the higher nature succeeded. And while that, if we take again Abdu'l Baha's point that there wasn't a book of God as we know it revealed here, but that there was different means, of course no one was ever shut out from guidance. But we didn't necessarily need something written and instructed in a way that we were already attuned to how we should be. Namely, as Ernest says, we lived within harmony of creation. We let God run the business, as he says, and we didn't have to work in the same way that other cultures did. Um, yeah, that kind of, I think, awareness or sensitivity to that. Okay, whatever is being brought to us, we have to somehow find a way to incorporate it. There's no exclusion, but of course, that left us so susceptible to what ultimately was, brought to us, which was
Mhm.
again an attack right to the soul of saying again, like, this is evil, this is right, this is wrong, and God is only this way, not that way. All these things, never mind the material injustice and oppression. So there
Yeah.
was this, I think, and again, if we take the lens of the ultimate goal of God's plan from time immemorial is to bring, his children ultimately together in oneness. This would have happened anyway in this direction, but it didn't have to happen with such violence for those that, yeah, they haven't come to terms with the
Mhm,
history of
mhm,
their own people who
mhm,
have done this
mhm,
to their own prophets, etc.
mhm, mhm.
So,
I would imagine within the psyche, the soul and personality of a lot of First Nations people, there are a special set of contradictions. Um, for those who think and ponder, and question, because of the circumstances of, tens of thousands of years of continuity and relative harmony with
mhm,
nature and within the tribe, the nation. And then, as you say, the sudden and violent clash with an invading people,
mhm,
and then the subjugation and the danger even in practicing traditional culture and spirituality,
yep,
but at the same time not being really accepted uh, until recently, to some extent, by the new industrialized colonial population.
mhm,
So for a Native person who does have a connection with the traditional identity, which thankfully is strengthening, that connection with the spiritual teachings and so on and culture. But there must be a lot of questions. For example, yourself. I mean, the way you describe your background and your family, it sounds like you had a lot of blessings, one might even say, in that your family was pretty together, and their education was a high value.
Mhm.
Um, but yourself, for example, I think every human has these kinds of uh, dualities, you could say,
Mhm.
light and
Mhm.
dark,
Absolutely.
self-doubt sometimes. How do you experience that personally, if you
Sure.
deign to share?
Sure, absolutely. And again, I come back to, quite frankly, the Association of Baha'i Studies, that conference, that moment,
Right.
where it was in the space of a weekend in 2003 that going down to that conference. It was at a hotel, it was a conference, you're speaking, it was learning, it wasn't in, there was no, nothing in the water there, so to speak. But I do feel there's so much in the writings that speak to he doeth whatsoever he willeth, like that moment where if there is a level of sincerity that you've been trying to live a certain way, you have a certain amount of knowledge, there's really no other doubt. It's just that, the implication of materialism in this world, that it satisfies the ego, it's fun, whatever, but that, okay, it's kind of time. It's time to change track, and it's that subtle and simple that I don't know. I guess that being raised in such a way that this isn't the place to be. Like it's the next camp. There's something beyond this. All of that suffering. Yes, this ranch and these horses and the respect my
Mm,
grandfather had was paid for in full because of what was taken away and lost, etc., but also what he sacrificed for, and then ultimately holding together certain values to maintain his family, his children, and then it was progressive. So yeah, there's flaws all throughout that. Never
mm,
mind. So when the time came, and Hugh, again, it wasn't a dream. It was I just feel as though there were certain dynamics, certainly, but in my hotel room on the night before, I was talking to one of one of my closest friends from college, and we got into a lot of trouble together. And
mm,
I was just telling him like this is it, like this is it, like whatever it is, was setting into place. And flying back home, I knew my roommate at the time would have like a bowl of weed and marijuana ready to go, and as my first test and so on. And so ever since then, it was an easy step, so to speak, off of all of those things. But I think the balancing act is just knowing I am so free and open right now. I could probably have it in such control to behave in similar ways as I did, really for only a couple of years. Um, but that I have to carry that now for the rest of my life, that how easy it would be
mm.
to step over there. And probably I would feel just fine. But man, I just there's an understanding that I it would be cut off from perhaps all other source of guidance, protections, insights, and so on, purpose and meaning, and might fall even further. I don't, you look at different parts from a mental illness standpoint of like, oh, you've changed, people that are in the throes of addiction and so on, that
Yeah.
it's not the same person anymore. It's hard. I don't know if that would happen to me, so to speak, but I think internally, it would be that kind of self-awareness. And again, like well, there's that quote from Baha'u'llah that says, to look within yourself and find me standing within thee. Like
Mm.
my sense of relationship and knowledge of God has to do now with more of how I'm living my life and not it's something external.
Right. Well, two things come up for me from what you've just shared. One is it's a question I ask almost every guest is, was there a time in your life when you had a kind of epiphany or a pivot or turning point which led to your spiritual path of unfolding? And then the other part is that although we all have trauma, it's part of the human condition, right? And sometimes ancestral trauma that it gets
Yeah,
handed down over the generations and so on.
right.
National trauma, family karma, as they say in the East. Um,
Mhm.
but one of the great teachers from Tibet, Chogyam Trungpa, who was the first Lama to come to America,
Hmm.
and there have been many comparisons actually between the Tibetan Buddhist approach And before Buddhism arrived in Tibet, the people there had a shamanistic kind of a religion, very similar to our First Nations. But he said once that we much suffering has a cause, of course, but much of the suffering that we engage in is unnecessary suffering, and
Yes.
he called it the neurotic crimes.
Hmm.
So we have something maybe happened, and we start to dwell on it, and we become obsessed with it, and we go over and over in our mind, building a case for nobody loves me, or no matter what I do, I can't succeed, or one of those psychological beliefs that can be so limiting. But the way that you describe your epiphany or whatever it was, like at that conference, it sounds like it sort of happened easily for you. It was like a natural kind of just a feeling, well, I have some autonomy here. I can think for myself. I can make a choice. And this looks like a really effective choice. So
Hmm.
that's the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah, just another reflection too, and I think, and had it not been also, you mentioned earlier this generational trauma, which I think we really understand to different degree, and Native communities in particular are advancing reflection and understanding and means to break certain intergenerational trauma specific to residential school and otherwise
Yeah.
that I would have, and again, thanks to education, which would provide tools and insights and allow, like my parents, my father was an educator, and I have a stack of his old post-secondary papers and stuff, things that he was working through at the same time of carrying a lot of the pains and the hurts that he still had,
Mm,
and being able to kind of, I think, conceptually understand that these things are not are separate rather from what I could sense and feel in him and his strength and his confidence and his security, spiritually speaking. And that, incidentally, was when my mom and him got together, because he wasn't a Baha'i at that time. He was within the Dakota Presbytery, but her recognition of his certitude and understanding of a core principle of spirituality
yes.
was what really she was attracted to. And
Mm.
again, a lot of times, as we know, it's this journey. If you stop on the journey, look around. That's your life, man. If you, but there's an infinite path ahead of us as of now, and eventually, yeah, as he grew and had experience and so on, naturally, I think he found himself declaring and recognizing Baha'u'llah and so forth.
Yeah. You
So,
mentioned in one of your TED Talks, I believe, that some of the greatest teachers save their best teachings right till the end of their life. And I think you're referring to your father.
yes, yes. I just, again, and then quite frankly, in that period of time for us, my mother-in-law, 4 years before that, did the same thing. She passed away from glioblastoma, and there was actually a short little a film made about this process because as soon as she got the diagnosis, she went home, and that's it. I am living the rest of this time in a state of joy and healing and an embrace of that process. I think she spoke with my dad a few times. She was always my mother. We weren't her daughter and I weren't married just yet, but we were in that process. And in fact, her mother gave consent to us to get married before she passed away, so that we always feel quite blessed for that. But yeah, he, and all the while he like again, these are the things where, well, it could be this, it could be that. No, I choose and I accept the certain evidence that his ability to choose circumstance and follow that circumstance with a belief of as much relief to his family, because it really was a health situation now where he could see, certainly my mom's life would have begun now, could have been a lifelong caretaker for many years to date, for his health needs. And that facing a certain surgical choice would have meant extension of quality of life or quantity and that kind of thing. So I don't know how. In fact, I don't recall if we've ever really talked or my mom shared how he came to that decision to discontinue. He was on peritoneal dialysis and such. And then at that point, he like who would have known? He could have labored, leaguered on and suffered for however long, but it took 4 days, which I felt, there was so much symbolism in his
Yeah,
passing from a ceremonial standpoint of these
that's
stages.
right. Right.
Um, and
That's
so
right.
having my hand on his chest, with his last beat of his heart as he was going,
Mm.
just as a father figure, you can toss in any kind of masculine and toxic or otherwise, like my dad, his champion, his strength, and so on, did
Yes.
it, left those impressions, I think, that satisfied that last bit of a gentle way to move
Mm.
into the next world and kind of precede us.
Mm.
So I really,
Beautiful.
yeah.
And you said that he was a boxer?
Oh, my grandfather was.
Well, it
My
was the
grandfather.
grandfather. Okay.
My dad
So,
was a basketball player and a
right,
teacher.
right, right. An educator and a warrior in a way, because boxing is pugilistic, right? But a sacred warrior, perhaps. So, do you have a sense of your ancestors being, in the next world, the spiritual world, looking down on you, or assisting you at times, or available if you need them, if you're going through a tight squeeze?
For sure, for sure. And I'm very much, you mentioned kind of the state and different susceptibilities, and that's replete throughout the writings as well. And I appreciate this. We see it, and certainly it's never not been there, of course. And
Yeah,
whether it's soothsayers to witches to
yeah,
prophets, whatever, there's been
sure.
people have interacted with that world from time immemorial, and to varying degree, of course. But I find the dreams that I've had to date, from immediate family to those who have just passed on, and I think, Baha'u'llah indicates that, for those family members who have not recognized the manifestation of today, they'll be under such care and mercy by virtue of relatives that have done so, because that kind of constitutes this, if blood lineage, family lineage, you only do kind of come through two people at a time.
That's right.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And there's actually some documented story. One of our relatives was Vine Deloria Jr., who was really this prolific scholar and did a lot of this documentation. There's a book called Singing for a Spirit, which he really did track this lineage of the Deloriers.
Mm.
That's where my mom's name
Yeah,
comes from, Deloria, and it's a
that's
French
right.
word, Delorier.
Hmm.
Uh, and going back to my great great grandfather, who was a signatory to different treaty, there's a picture of him at the White House at the time with chiefs there.
Yeah,
He went by Sassuay, which was how the people pronounce Francois.
okay.
Uh, yeah, so all of these, but he had different powers and vision around where his family lineage would go. And so, yes, I do feel quite connected to that. But also in very much consideration of the future generation, because I can only imagine, the leaders and the families of that, parents at that time facing
Yes,
our world is completely changing. What
yes.
do we do for our children?
I believe there's something in the writings, perhaps Baha'u'llah, who says that something like, paraphrased, um, what we're going through now at this time in history, it seems to be more and more obvious that it's a crucible. It's really
Yeah,
a powerful, deep, painful transition to something better. And in the healing profession, and there's in holistic healing, there's an expression called the healing crisis, which means it gets
right,
worse before it gets better.
right.
Um, so we're going through the worsening, it seems, in many ways right now. But I think the quotation says something like, all the greatest souls and saints from past and future cycles are looking at this crucible, this transition, and would give anything to be able to be here for even 1 minute to
Yeah,
serve the process, because what we have the ability to contribute to right now is the future of maybe thousands and thousands of years of human civilization. So every
100%.
act of sacrifice based on compassion and love and collaboration and true consultation and authentic dialogue is going to plant seeds, that will bear fruit for many, many generations.
That's one of the internal arguments for me that says bring on AI and let it do what it needs to do because I don't know
Exactly.
how are we going to track all of these things as well? And to your point in the writings, there's indication of these things that will be studied and looked at, and I mean this is the history books of the next 1,000 years of this effort, which is building and reunification versus somehow thinking that civilization is proceeding based on the ending of war, which is an illusion anyway. That's it's so
Hmm.
manufactured material and so on. So stop, creating peace out of a war that shouldn't exist to begin with is not progress as opposed to these other systems that are now truly helping people understand one another.
Right. Yeah, I think AI is really, it's like giving wings to the birds, instead of having to scrounge around on the ground, they can fly.
Yeah.
And it's just going to make, it's sort of like we have in the physical body a nervous system, which is the intermediary between with sense perception, the outer world, and our inner experience. And then on the subtle level of the so-called etheric body, that's what Chinese and Indian medicine is all about, Tai Chi and all that stuff. It's the subtle body, the nadis and the chakras, which distribute the energy. And I think that AI is going to be kind of a new nervous system for the planet, for planetary consciousness
Mm.
that we can all use and benefit from.
I like that. Yeah, yeah. I like that because it connects to me, there's that I shared this point last night at the gathering because I had to give some opening comments just that as you may know, the very period at which the Bob declared his mission is when that fellow created the telegraph
Yes,
and choice of that first phrase of what hath God wrought.
that's right.
So
1844, the same day. Yeah,
yeah,
May
yeah,
23rd, 1844. Yeah.
it's just, and because again, the hard part is, as I know, Hugh, as in your travels, I imagine you see where so much, because I work in education with young people, and my eldest graduated this year, and it just, it is just hard to see how much junk is filled up and takes the space of where I see weekly when they gather as youth and get into the institute process and conversation
Mhm.
using to your point of AI as well, because right now that's the distraction in the discourse. Oh, is it bad? Is it good? Is it cheating?
Yeah,
Is it not? Like as
right.
opposed to what the kids aren't learning what they need to be learning, and applicable things. We're still reading about the 18 War of 1812 and uh, you know, so these kind of things that where you could be applying the consciousness of young people today in the world that they
Yes,
come into.
that's right.
So,
We
and
should.
just to quickly too, as I know you had some great questions and coming back to some of these cultural lenses. It reminds me just a quick story because of my relative Sasway. There's a story of
Yeah.
where he had a pair of moccasins. This is my own like Wizard of Oz ruby slippers kind of reflection where
Great. Okay.
had I think it was an owl beaded on one and a lightning bolt on the other. And the story goes that if he moved his foot on either one, you would hear and perceive a corresponding screech of an
Sound.
owl or a thunderclap bolt.
Right.
And so, so many of these kind of stories I can hold as true that that would take place, but also explore, as Al-Dubois implies, like what is the allegory, what is the meaning, what's the important longer term teaching behind such stories. And so I came across a line in a book that this fellow Raymond DeMille had written around Black Elk. It's called The Sixth Grandfather, and it was just the exploration of that vision, the book, and his life, and so on. But he says how for the Lakota people, the powers granted in visions can be thought of as the ability to recognize and utilize transformations in the natural world. And so that kind of application from again that balance of science makes a little bit more sense to me in that sure anybody can have the powers as they may produce, but you typically those things are individual. It's not like you can say, oh, here you can have the power too. Now everybody. make the lightning crash, so to speak, or that is it more practical and a teaching aspect where everybody could benefit of training children, other people to recognize transformations and be so in tune with the environment from a smell to a sense of pressure and not immediately think, oh, something's wrong. I got something in my ear and it's my ear balance, or as opposed to barometric pressure that something has changed in the environment. What are we going to do about it?
Definitely. Right. That there's a spiritual underlying meaning to physical phenomena, just
Right.
like every in the form of psychotherapy that I studied and teach, the Hakomi method. The we call them indicators, like a physical. Someone has their head to the side or one shoulder higher or a tone in the voice, and those physical indicators, even though they may be unconscious, actually tell the story of that person's psychological belief system. And so much of our education, unfortunately, and this, I think it's all over the world pretty much. Every country has its own brand of deficit. But
Right.
as you were saying, we teach the same old thing over and over and over again with the same limited and biased and prejudiced perspective. But just as there have been a set of archetypes, you might say, that have ushered us through up till now, we're entering a new world, a new civilization, maybe interplanetary, who knows?
Yeah.
And we need a new set of archetypes based on the principles of universality and this connection of the body and the mind and the spirit and all the peoples coming together. It's so beautiful, and it seems to be a hard time getting there. But thanks to people like yourself, Jordan, and your steadfastness, that you've inherited partly from your ancestors and probably earned a lot with your own trial and so
Mm.
on, that you are a force for light and helping other people walk the good red road. And it's been delightful to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Well, Hugh, I can't believe an hour has gone by already, it seems, and I think, yeah, we could probably continue into chatting. It'd be great to chat some more at another time, but I
Sure.
think, yeah, like I find, especially with my young children, and what you're providing in your conversations and explorations, like these, if the light indeed is shining and Baha'u'llah represents like the zenith of this universal cycle of prophethood and he is the supreme manifestation, then I think there was a line that's kind of like a funny line from one of the songs that people have written to reflect this day. Like, there's no place for us to run. There is no shadow any longer. And yes, you can turn away and within yourself and not receive those blessings. Love me that I may love thee, and so on. But as soon as you kind of open one
Mhm.
eye towards this and you begin reflecting this, it can only grow quite rapidly from there. And yeah, I think it's been great visiting as a reflection of that we focus on
Absolutely.
spiritual
The
themes.
greater the light, the deeper the shadow. And as you say, if there is this new source of light growing by day and night, even, that the shadow is going to be more evident. So we have to deal with it. We can't deny it anymore, run from it, cover
Right,
it up. So
right.
it can be challenging, but I mean, if we're all in it together, then and we can be humble and non-judgmental and each person do their little part. I
Yeah.
would absolutely love to have you back again sometime, and
Sure.
thank you. So enjoy the last few hours of the weekend.
We shall. You as well.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye now.
Thanks again, Jordan. Bye.